Since the start of the winter meetings, the New York Mets have signed Justin Verlander, Jose Quintana. They traded for Brooks Raley. They signed Brandon Nimmo and David Robertson, and they just landed Kodai Senga on an extremely affordable contract. What's left for the Mets to do this offseason? We'll be discussing that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, the Mets made a huge signing this weekend. Kodai Senga comes aboard, 5 years, $75 million. One thing I did not discuss in yesterday's show, that contract has an opt-out after the third season. So let's start there. Even more of a steal of a deal for the Mets. And for Senga, I think his decision makes more sense too. Everything that he wanted, the Mets have to win now. Big market, analytics, it's all here. But also, you now get the chance to play on a team that clearly is going for it all. Where you could be on the biggest stage to win a World Series. Where you can also be showcasing your talents in the biggest market for 3 years before you would hit free agency again and try to get the absurd contract. And we're not even entirely sure what the bidding got to on Kodai Senga. He could have got something more than this. I think that's pretty clear. But he has a chance, if everything goes right, to make way more because of this decision, because of the stage he will be on with this Mets team. And when you look at it from a Mets perspective, less years than you really have to really worry about if he does opt out. So 3 years fits right into your window. If he sticks around, he sticks around. But to get that AAV at $15 million, it just makes this signing a little bit less expensive than, of course, everything is right now for Steve Cohen, because the luxury tax bill is absurd. That's something we'll discuss in a podcast all by itself later this week, the way that he has just gone scorched earth this offseason. But as we look at the rotation, my question now is, will the Mets employ a 6-man rotation this year, or are they just going to keep their depth, or are they planning on trading a starter? So let's go with the concretes. Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer atop your rotation. You got Kodai Senga as your 3, Jose Quintana as your 4. They got 3 of those 4 guys this offseason, 1 last offseason. Now, Carlos Carrasco could be your 5. Got him 2 offseasons ago in the Francisco Lindor trade. $14 million for 1 year. If the Mets wanted to shop Carlos Carrasco, he would have a pretty good amount of trade value, I think. In this market where Taijuan Walker gets $18 million a season, 1 year of Carlos Carrasco, the low risk that you're discussing there, I mean, if you look at the market, where would Carlos Carrasco fit in right now anyway? Obviously not quite at a Bassett level. There's probably other arms that teams would think the upside was higher on, like a Nate Eovaldi. But, I mean, Carrasco, as dependable as they come, I think there is some value there. And for the Mets to be able to get $14 million off of their books, that could be attractive, particularly if you're able to either A, address another need, right? Meaning getting a 4th outfielder, getting another complement at DH, or adding to the bullpen. Or if you can use Carrasco as a way to get a James McCann off the books. I think all of that is possible, but I also do believe that the Mets like having this much depth in their rotation, and it's pretty obvious when you think back to where they were last year, where they could have gone into the season and said, look, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, they're going to compete to be the 5th starter. But no, what do? They get Chris Bassett right before spring training, if my memory serves correct there. and that lengthened their rotation. That allowed David Peterson and McGill to fall into a 6 and 7 in the rotational depth chart. DeGrom goes down. McGill steps in. He performs well the first month. He gets hurt himself. Peterson fills the gaps. And the Mets got through the year. So I do believe that the Mets, more likely than trying to trade Carrasco, will want to keep him and keep that depth intact. Now, with that said, would they consider going to a 6-man rotation? That is to include David Peterson and to keep Kodai Senga fresh, to keep Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer fresh, and as well as all the back-end guys. I think it makes some sense. I'm not sure if the Mets will go there. I mean, I do believe that their top two pitchers in Verlander and Scherzer probably would prefer to pitch in a traditional 5-man rotation and stay fresh. These are old school guys who, in their minds, staying fresh is staying on a routine. For the science behind managing these guys, it would tell us instead you should be concerned about rest, and a 6-man rotation would make some sense. But whether it's a 6-man or a 5-man, whether they trade Carlos Carrasco or they hang on to that $14 million on the books next season, any way you slice it, this team's done when it comes to adding to the rotation. There's no need for another arm. So with that in place, you have to think about other needs. The bullpen. We're going to go through that. We're going to go through the lineup and where do they fit with the pieces they have? Do the pieces they have come together to make a competent roster that Buck Showalter can manage freely and be able to mix and match how he would see fit? We're going to get into all of that. But when you look at the starter depth that the Mets have right now, it is remarkable to have that 4 that we already mentioned, right? And then beyond that, to have Carrasco and Peterson as a 5 and a 6, to have Tyler McGill, Joey Lucchesi, Jose Budo, and Eleazar, your name is hard for me, and I apologize. Eleazar Hernandez, who I might still have it wrong. That, though, is 10 starters a depth. The rotation is completely built. They are fine. The next question is the bullpen ready to go as well? Because I think they're closer than a lot of Mets fans would give them credit for. Before we get to that, though, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline, always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. And right now, look at the World Series odds. The Mets are at plus 900. Only 2 teams favored ahead of them to win the World Series next season. That is the Astros at plus 600 and the Dodgers at plus 700. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. Bet online, where the game starts. The New York Mets starting rotation is complete, but what about their bullpen? Let's go through the names. Right now, let's just say the Mets go with a 6-man rotation or David Peterson is in the bullpen. Or maybe it's McGill or Lucchesi. One of those guys is a long man in the bullpen. So that's 6 of your spots already taken. If you're going to have 13 pitchers, who are the 7 arms in your bullpen you're looking at? Edwin Diaz is 1. David Robertson 2. Brooks Raley 3. Drew Smith 4. They just drafted Zach Green in the Rule 5 draft, so he will be in the bullpen until he's not. That's 5. John Curtis has been on this roster since last year, recovering for Tommy John. I believe it was Tommy John. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was. And then you got Jeff Brigham, who came over in that trade with the Marlins that eventually sent Jake Mangum to Miami and also brought Hernandez to the Mets. So, based on the arms that they've brought in and the ones that they had, or the one that they had in Drew Smith, they're good in the bullpen currently. They have enough arms. You look at the depth. They got Yon Lopez. They got Bryce Montes de Oca. They got Steven Nogasek. They got Steven Ridings. They got Taylor Cecido. And they got William Woods. Now, the last 3 names I mentioned, Ridings, Cecido, and Woods, they've added all those guys this offseason. So, you'd imagine they would not just simply be going out to cut one of them. Steven Nogasek, I think, probably has his roster spot maybe the most in jeopardy, although we saw some decent things from him last year. Jan Lopez is another one. The Mets could drop one of those guys off the 40, and then they could pick up, whether it's an Adam Ottavino or a Trevor May. I think that is still on the table. They might want one more, because if I'm looking at the Mets bullpen right now, I think Diaz, Robertson, Raley are three guys that you trust. I think Drew Smith, you trust about 75% of them. And that's really about it. The other guys are more, you're looking at everyone and trying to find a couple of them that will stick, and a couple of them will stick as we get into the season. But for now, there's really four. And so would you want a fifth? And would you want a third late inning reliever? Would you want to have Diaz, Robertson, and somebody else so that Raley, who could still pitch late innings, would also be more of that left-handed reliever that goes after the big lefty, whether that be in the late innings or whether you're in a pinch where there's two runners on and a Bryce Harper or Juan Soto walks up, or a Freddie Freeman, and you're in the fourth inning, a guy that you can go to the pen to get a big out. So with that said, I'm looking at the former Mets on the tables, making some sense, whether that's Adam Ottavino, whether that's Trevor May, who I think wants to be back and could be had on a reasonable contract. That's kind of my favorite. Or if it's a Michael Fulmer and you go that route, that's another option. So I think the Mets probably add one more arm, but they don't have to. They've done enough adding to their depth that they could always address that bullpen midseason and stick with what they got, and it's fine. And then it's crazy when all they really had was Edwin Diaz and Drew. Well, they didn't even have Diaz. I mean, they had to sign Diaz. But to go from Drew Smith, that's it, to Edwin Diaz, Drew Smith, to now looking at this pen with Raley and Robertson added in, and then all the depth they've brought in, the bullpen's pretty much set. So then what are the other needs and how the Mets address them? Well, fourth outfielder. That's a need. DH. What are you doing at DH? Are you riding with Vogelback? Is it Vogelback and Ruff again? Right now, that would be what you're going into opening day with. And I know Mets fans would freak out about it. If Darren Ruff is the best version of himself, it would be okay. But can that ever happen here, or do you have to trade him? And that's also what we're going to get into the next segment is, what are the guys that you have that you're going to try to trade, and can you? But when I look at the needs, fourth outfielder is the one that kind of screams out. Can you bring in someone that would be good enough to start, that can get some time at DH, ideally complement Vogelback in that way? Play some center, play some left, play some right. There's one name that screams out more than any other to me, and that's Adam Duvall. He has hit 30 home runs 3 times in his big league career. He has won a Gold Glove in 2021. He could play center. He was starting for the Braves before Michael Harris came up last year. He could play left, he could play right. He's familiar in this division. And in the right Duvall season, he would even maybe supplant a Canna and push Canna to that fourth outfielder role. So if you got a Duvall, you'd have 2 vets sort of angling for playing time, knowing that if the inevitable Marte or Nimmo injury pops up, you have some coverage. I really like the idea of Adam Duvall. Now, DH options, there's some that we're going to get to here. We're going to say that for the next segment. Some internal options at DH, external options at DH. We'll go through some of the other names I have here for fourth outfielders and some of the players you'd like the Mets to trade. But before we get to that, today's episode is also brought to you by SimpliSafe. At Locked On Mets, we believe home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family the gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, and that is SimpliSafe. Right now, SimpliSafe is offering our listeners 40% off a new security system, but don't put this off. In an emergency, you want 24/7 professional monitoring agents using Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify that a threat is real, so you can get a higher priority police response. SimpliSafe is a whole home security system with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside, smarter ways to detect motion that alerts you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. With the top-rated SimpliSafe app, you can stay in complete control of your system, arm, disarm, unlock for a guest, access your camera, or adjust the system settings anytime, anywhere, and it will all cost you for that 24/7 professional monitoring service less than $1 a day. That is half the price of a traditional home security system. Don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite home security system. Get 40% off any new system at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb today. Again, that is simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Looking at DH for the New York Mets, right now it's pretty simple. It's the same situation you had last year. It is a lot of Daniel Vogelbach against right-handed pitching. Against lefties, you're going to roll with maybe Mark Vientos, maybe Darren Ruff. The other option is Eduardo Escobar at DH. If you have Beatty starting at third, Escobar could be your everyday DH, or he could be the right-handed complement to Vogelbach himself. Now, when you're looking at this roster as a whole, here is the lineup that I think they'd currently roll out against a right-handed pitcher. Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte. I like Jeff McNeil third. I'm going to keep doing it until the Mets put Lindor back in that spot. But I like McNeil batting third and Lindor batting fifth, with Alonso batting cleanup. Vogelbach batting sixth. Beatty, Alvarez, Canna. That would be the starting nine against a righty. With obviously Nido getting some time at catcher too. Because I'm sure he's going to still start a lot of games for the Mets next year. Line up first left-handed pitchers. Nimmo, Marte, McNeil, Alonso, Lindor. That doesn't change. Francisco Alvarez at DH. Eduardo Escobar at third base. Mark Canna. Tomas Nido. Now, if you were to get a Duvall, who you can put Alvarez at catcher, and you could DH either Canna or Duvall, or a Marte even, to give him a day off. All of that is at your disposal. Your bench, which also factors into DH, is Vogelbach, Guillorme, Escobar, Nido. Right now, I would say, McCann as well. And then, at that point, you'd probably be kind of set there, and Ruff and Vientos are let off. I could see a 3-catcher mix if McCann sticks around, and Alvarez will get a lot of time at DH. Or I could see the Mets get rid of McCann, and then you can have an additional player on the roster, whether that be the guys that you already have in Ruff and Vientos, or an Adam Duvall or another free agent. Now, the problem with having Vogelbach on the roster is that if it's Vogelbach and Ruff, Vogelbach, Vientos, you just have too many pieces that really can't play positions. Now, Ruff, he can play some outfield, but it didn't look great at points last season. He can play some first base, and I think he's fine there, probably even a little bit better than Pete. But I just would be surprised to see Ruff still on this team. I think he gets traded. And I even think there's a chance that Vogelbach gets traded. I think they like him as a fallback. I think he's perfectly suitable to stay on this Mets team. And that option at whatever it was, 1.5, was so team friendly. Of course you were going to pick it up. But if the Mets still want to improve their lineup, I think DH is where you do it. And that's where you get into Michael Brantley and Michael Conforto. If you clear up that spot and you can give a player like a Brantley or a Conforto Vogelbach's at bats, I think you convince either of them to sign, and then they would give you that extra coverage in the outfield. I mean, I could see you trading Vogelbach and then bringing Conforto and Duvall into the mix. That would be a whole nother conversation for another day, but that's on the table. Now, Trey Mancini, another DH option that would complement Vogelbach. And that's really the remainder of this list. It's Mancini, JD Martinez, Justin Turner, Brandon Drury, Luke Voigt. Those are some of the names that are out there. And of that mix, as far as the right-handed complement goes, maybe I like Drury the most. I don't know. It's tough. It's a tough spot that they're in. But not a tough spot. It's a great spot to be in, but it's just a tough spot trying to figure out which way to go. Because there's a lot of options. Because ideally, it's Vogelbach, Vientos. That would be the most ideal scenario if you don't make an addition. Now, fourth outfield options. Duvall. See, Duvall kind of checks both boxes. That's what I like about him. And you could say the same thing to a certain extent for Conforto. Brantley, not really, because defensively at his age, I just don't know how much he has left in the tank. So I'd say that a Conforto and Duvall both kind of fill that. Although Conforto, I don't really love him in center. Tyler Naquin coming back would be an option. Not a great one. Rafael Ortega, Jake Marisnick, Travis Jankowski, Jackie Bradley Jr., Roman Quinn, Garrett Hampson, Robbie Grossman, Raimel Tapia. Everybody after Naquin from that, actually maybe after Ortega. Marisnick, Jankowski, Bradley Jr., Roman Quinn, Garrett Hampson, Robbie Grossman, Tapia. Almost all those guys. It'd be like minor league signings that I'd be comfortable with them. I don't think that any of them should be guaranteed a spot on the roster. But they're options that are out there. Now, trades. So we're going to close the show here. Could the Mets trade James McCann this offseason? Can they get rid of Daniel Rowe? I think those are the two guys they're really going to try to push. Other guys that I think could be traded, and it would probably be to service getting a McCann off the books is a possibility. Mark Vientos, James McCann as a package, that's going to be floated. Now, can you get anything of value back in that? Can you get a fourth outfielder? Can you get a bullpen arm? Can you get something for your roster this year that makes you comfortable giving up Vientos to dump McCann's salary? Other ways the Mets can move James McCann. They could attach Carlos Carrasco to him, as I spoke about earlier. McGill or Peterson, if they want to get rid of one of those guys to get off McCann, they can do that. Vientos already said that falls into that same mix. Or you're just eating a lot of salary just to clear a spot off the roster. Or you're just straight up cutting them. Which I don't think they'll do. I think that there's a team out there, if you lower that price tag enough, if you get McCann from $12 million a season to $6 million, I think that there's a team out there that would want a James McCann to be their backup catcher. Beyond that, I look at the Mets and they're pretty set here. You know, there's little moves they can make still, but I think they just completed their offseason for the most part, and it's a damn good one, in my opinion. Now, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you should go to stay up to date with everything going on around the world of sports. Follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.